Good evening, everybody. My name is Doug Donnelly. I'm pastor here at University Baptist Church, and we are so thrilled to have Dr. Toya Richards here to give us a presentation. We at University Baptist had the great joy of hearing her preach this morning, hearing her talk about her commission missionary work that is going to begin soon in South Africa, as soon as she can raise the money. And there's opportunities for that, and I'm sure she'll tell you about that, but there's also information down the hall here. If you're new here, the restrooms are through this door and up the stairs, and we're just really glad that you're here. We, as a congregation, are striving to be more conscious and leaning into doing anti-racism work. Oftentimes we think of ourselves as allies, which is something that's really rather presumptuous to label yourself. We hope to become accomplices in the work of racial justice and racial healing in our world, and this is a piece of that. This evening is in part underwritten by the Alliance of Baptists, which Dr. Richards used to be on staff there. We are part of about 27 congregations across the U.S. and Canada that are part of a Lilly-funded grant to do thriving congregations for racial justice. And so we're glad to be a piece of that as well. And those of you who are here, I know are all allies and all people that are interested in the same thing. And those people that are watching from home, we say hello to you. You can turn around and just wave at the camera back there. There they are, yeah. See, we're welcoming and affirming of this. I'm going to stop talking and turn the podium over to Dr. Richards.
So thank you for coming out tonight to expand your knowledge, to build upon what you're already doing, and learn a little bit about the work that I've been engaged in. Before I dive into that, though, I want to do a little something with us. You know, we all have come to this space carrying various things. We all have people and things and issues on our hearts and our minds. And so for just a few moments, I want to bring us into the room. I want to bring us into the room and center us in this space so that we can be in position to fully hear and fully receive that which is here for us this evening. So if you will, I'm going to engage in a little exercise that comes from this book that I absolutely love called My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathways to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies by Resmaa Menakem. And so, for you here gathered in the sanctuary and also for you who are joining us virtually in whatever space you're in, for just a few moments, join me in this exercise. Sit comfortably in your chair or in your pew and close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Imagine that you're floating in space. Below you, planet Earth turns slowly. Watch it turn for a few seconds. Slowly descend until the part of the country where you're in fills your field of vision. Stay directly above it, like a GPS satellite, so that it doesn't move beneath you. Keep descending until you're looking down on whatever city and town, mountain, valley, this place, this church. Until your body is sitting in this space that you're in right now. Observe your body's posture, any movements it makes. Slowly and smoothly rest. Rest in your body. For a few breaths, simply be aware of being in your body. Relax and let the chair support you. Notice the sensation of the pew, of the chair, against your legs and your thighs. Notice how it feels against your back. Open your eyes. Orient yourself by looking around you and behind you. Return to the here and now. I want to tell you about a friend of mine. Her name is Ariel. Ariel is a black woman who lives and works in Minneapolis, and South Minneapolis is where I first encountered her. Ariel told me her story. She told me a little bit about her journey to this place. She told me that she came to realize after being here for a little while that, quote, navigating the white spaces here in the Twin Cities was, she said, a threat to her well-being. She said the policies and the systems were not created for her in mind. And oftentimes there was a detriment to her and for people that looked like her. Ariel said the cost for her was physical signs of chronic stress and trauma. She said, quote, I would get rashes, which I've never experienced before. I was sick often on the weekends. I would have stomach aches. I would have headaches, really tight shoulders. And then the really extreme that took for me was sleep disruption in the form of dreams and nightmares. Trauma expert Resmaa Menakem, who I just referenced in his book, said, the body most cares about safety and survival. So when something happens that overwhelms it, trauma can be created. Resmaa said trauma always happens in the body. It is a spontaneous protective mechanism used by the body to stop or thwart further or future potential damage. Let me say that again. Trauma always happens in the body. It is a spontaneous protective mechanism used by the body to stop or thwart further or future potential damage. The traumas that live in black bodies like Ariel's which don't feel settled around white ones for a multitude of reasons, are deep and persistent. Deep and persistent, that's what Resma says. They contribute to a long list of chronic stress disorders in Black bodies, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, learning disabilities, depression and anxiety, diabetes, high blood pressure, and various other physical and emotional ailments. And so Ariel's story lined up with my story. That was my own lived experience. After arriving in the Minnesota area in 2019, first on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, and then I moved into St. Paul area and ultimately found myself in South Minneapolis. And so I began to realize very quickly that I wasn't in Kansas anymore. Although I had lived a number of different places and traveled extensively across the globe, I had never experienced the kind of racism and white supremacy that existed in this space. And it was so subversive, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And so I began to say, if this is my experience, what is the experience of others like me who have been here much longer than me? My experience lined up with Ariel's, I later learned. And so I made some assumptions. I assumed that there were others like me before learning about Ariel and others. I assumed there were others like me. And I assumed that specifically there were Black women who were being negatively affected as a result of the kind of racism and white supremacy that I had experienced. And so I set about the task of verifying my assumptions. That's what we do when we do the work of the academy and do the research kinds of work that lead to this kind of outcomes. We first must verify our assumptions. And I was doing that work, verifying what my assumptions were in the hope of arriving ultimately at a remedy for the issue. And so I developed an overarching question, which most research starts with. An overarching question, and here was my question. How has the impact of prolonged racism and white supremacy affected the psyches of Black women living in South Minneapolis and their sense of being worthy and vital members of humanity? And what do they need to thrive and sustain themselves for the long haul? That's a pretty big question, isn't it? That was what I was attempting to answer in this particular work. And so that led to the question and the framework for doing this work. I began to feel a fierce urgency of now to do something and turned to the Ministry of Pastoral Care as a possible mechanism for change. Pastoral care seeks to aid humankind as it deals with the weight of the world. It also equips people with the skills to navigate life in healthy and life-affirming ways. It is the practice of accompanying God's people using theological, psychological, and sociological tools to facilitate hope and love, change and transformation. Pastoral care is many other things as well. These are just some of the things that make up what this mode of care, spiritually focused mode of care is about. And so I began to look at how to interrogate this question that I had posed under the framework of pastoral care. For Black women in South Minneapolis, this also means looking at this question, interrogating this question, also means and meant incorporating womanist theology to achieve liberation. Womanist theology. A womanist. Who knows what a womanist is? I see somebody in the back. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see who you are. A womanist, first coined by Alice Walker, is a Black feminist. Womanist theology, as defined by Marsha I. Wiggins and Carmen Braun Williams, quote, is a way of thinking about God and ministry from the African American female perspective. As a pastoral care practitioner myself, focused primarily on that work in a community-based context, it was also necessary for me, as I was looking at the question and the framework, to elevate the theological through line that links the issue of my research with faith and Christianity. There was a clear connection, I found, between the women of South Minneapolis and the women who followed Jesus, including Mary, mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and many of the others. Trauma, disenfranchisement, resilience, self-reliance, and various other common traits mark both groups who were and are undoubtedly women of color. Womanist scholar Renita Weems called the women who followed Jesus a band of powerful sisters who couldn't be ignored. She said, quote, "Perhaps this is why the women always traveled together, thereby forcing history to remember them as a group, as sisters. They stayed together because there is strength and visibility when the women band together." And so, the question, the framework, and now the context. The context for this work is twofold. It is Grace Multimedia, more specifically gracemultimedia.org. You can look it up later. That is my social enterprise. It's a virtual social enterprise that creates opportunities for people to connect in life-affirming ways, engage the world critically, and transform into all they are created to be. It also is the site that houses this research. The second context for this work is the physical location of South Minneapolis, and specifically a section of South Minneapolis that stretches out from the intersection of 38th and Chicago Avenue, 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in the Powderhorn community. You all know where I'm talking about, right? So why South Minneapolis? Why South Minneapolis? Well, because it is the place that has an overabundance of well-documented, racially motivated incidents within it. This is, after all, where George Floyd's life was choked from him by the knee of then Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. The context. Minnesota's population is 83% white, and all of the counties of the Twin Cities metro area are at least 69% white. Racism and white privilege are deeply embedded in the economic and political structures of Minnesota and in Minneapolis specifically. I'm not telling you what you don't already know. By the state's own admission, comparing the economic status of people of other races with the region's white residents reveals many disparities, including educational attainment, labor force participation, unemployment, and income and poverty levels. These gaps are the result of racism so subversive, I used that word earlier, that it's often difficult to pinpoint. And that's according to eyewitnesses like University of Minnesota Professor Samuel Myers Jr., who is quoted in my research, and many, many others. The context. You've got to understand the context as you begin, before you fully dive in to the research and look in depth at the question. Racial covenants. Racial covenants show just how systemic racism and white supremacy was and still is. It's one small example of the depth of what I'm talking about. Clauses, these racial covenants, clauses inserted into property deeds, they prevented non-whites from occupying land. Owners could not sell, rent, or let their homes be used by non-whites. Quote, Black people and other people of color in Minneapolis still experience the harm caused by these covenants. Racially segregated neighborhoods generally have fewer parks and trees, more environmental hazards, poor access to supermarkets and medical care, and underfunded schools. That's according to the Just Deeds Project. Tanya Allen of the McKnight Foundation said this: systemic racism is pervasive. She's talking about the Twin Cities. Pervasive and discriminatory behaviors are embedded in multiple systems of services such as education, housing, criminal justice, and health. It cannot, she said, be isolated to one issue. Sharon, a Black woman living in earshot of 38th and Chicago, that's not her real name. She said, quote, the type of racism that I've experienced here is the kind that sort of reads like death by 1,000 paper cuts. I've been eviscerated by what the young ones call microaggressions, she said. A respondent to a survey that I circulated of Black women said, racism and white supremacy in South Minneapolis are everywhere. Asked how to rate her mental, physical, and emotional health and well-being, how they have been affected by this racism and white supremacy, she replied with a 10, the highest number. Both of these women join other Black females that I encountered over the course of doing this research, who share the experience of racialized trauma inflicted over 3+ years in the Twin Cities, and more specifically in South Minneapolis. My data, the data resulted from 3 one-on-one interviews, a 2-person focus group, responses from 2 return surveys, and a Sacred Time live gathering. And so, my discovery. Yes, Black women in South Minneapolis have been negatively impacted by prolonged racism and white supremacy. No surprise there. My assumptions were correct. And they also are developing healing communities for themselves and each other in a myriad of ways, in myriad ways. They're doing this from wellness spaces to mass action movements to organic get-togethers on front porches and in backyards and various other ways, a plethora of other ways. I found women who have started their own theater companies, their own therapy practices, their own yoga studios, and other initiatives in order to take control of their own restoration and healing, and to tap into the liberating power that resides in themselves and within the gathered community of sisters. Yes, and. These women are, without apology, creating and prioritizing. I'm emphasizing these words because they're really important. They are prioritizing opportunities to allow themselves to disconnect, even if briefly, from the systems that have caused them harm. And then they are processing their trauma together, metabolizing their trauma together in community. That's very, very important. So this is a divine movement that has developed and continues to unfold and continues to have sparks and to gain momentum, a divine movement. Ariel, my friend Ariel, said when she realized that the system was taking more from me than it deserved, and that her efforts were falling on hard ground, she began meeting with other Black women with similar stories and realizing she could find a different way. And so Ariel founded Render Free. Render Free, it was initially founded as a workspace and wellness club for Black and brown women, and it has now evolved into a coaching practice designed to, quote, disrupt racial trauma by promoting whole body wellness. Render Free, in all its forms, practices the prioritization of self-care and collective healing. She said, "My passion is in creating spaces for myself and for other Black women, Black and brown women, to feel that they can recognize the armor that they carry, which is beautiful and intricate and strong and heavy. Then allow themselves to lay that down when they're in the safety of good company." A divine movement. This divine movement taking place among Black women in South Minneapolis and really all throughout the Twin Cities is steeped in womanism. We talked about what that is, right? I defined what that is. This movement is steeped in womanism, and more specifically in womanist care. Write that down if you don't know that term. Womanist care. Womanist care, which Marcia Foster Boyd defines as the intentional process of caregiving and care receiving by African American women. It is the African American woman finding her place and her voice in this world. It is the bold expression of that woman caring circle. Womanist care. Womanist care provides several important elements for healing the identities of African American women, including the importance of empowering Black women's self-definition and the healing power of community, particularly relationships of mutual care among African American women. Black women in South Minneapolis, all over the Twin Cities, and what I'm learning is all over the United States, that's the next research, are developing also what I have termed as a SisTheology. Say that with me, SisTheology. SisTheology is a new division of theology that joins other womanist-centered theologies that explore Black women's faith in action. SisTheology is a shoot springing out from womanist theology that explores the God-given power present in Black women and made manifest through the gathered community. Its root word is sister, and is often shortened, this word sister, to sis in Black female circles where love and care exists. SisTheology examines how Black women are claiming and reclaiming their place as wonderfully made, fearfully and wonderfully made creations of God by tapping into their divine power and then combining it with a supportive sisterhood. SisTheology also studies the development and prioritization, there's that word again, of a countercultural set of beliefs and restorative practices for use over the long haul. WomanistCare and SisTheology. Black women are, my research has determined, restoring themselves from racialized trauma by redefining what care looks like. They're redefining what care looks like and feels like for wounded Black female bodies. Theirs is a womanist care and SisTheology-centered prescription for healing that focuses on holding space, sacred space, in various forms and shapes and activities, sacred activities for one another where individual and communal uplift can take place in broad and diverse ways. Resmaa Menakem said again, culture creates a sense of belonging, and belonging makes our bodies feel safe. If our collective body is to fully heal from the trauma of white body supremacy, we must create cultural shifts as well. That means new stories, new symbols, new rituals, new role models, new elders, and so on that are needed to settle bodies, mend trauma, and create more room in our nervous systems. That's what Resmaa said. I believe as Black women move in this divine movement that is centered in womanist care and SisTheology, they are also blowing fresh wind into traditional understandings of pastoral care. I defined it earlier, right? And so this movement is blowing a fresh wind. It is giving new energy and a new definition, a more expanded definition to what pastoral care is. Pastoral care that typically focuses on healing and sustaining and guiding. These women are unknowingly embracing the work of womanist pastoral theologians like Carol Watkins Ali, who assert that care that takes seriously racism and other forms of violent oppression must also be nurturing, empowering, and liberating if African Americans collectively are to survive the harshness of their external realities and the duress of their psychological realities as well. And so, the response. No good research is complete without tangible recommendations to help guide those who engage with it and with the information. And so, I offer up the following recommendations for consideration and adoption. Number one, believe the women. Believe the women. Just like the women following Jesus, who were tapped for a divine assignment to testify firsthand to the resurrection and to give Jesus' disciples instructions on their next steps, so too have Black women who've experienced racialized trauma here in South Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, and across the U.S. They have been called to share. We have been called to share our resurrection stories too. Believe the women. Believe the women and in the divine healing movement they have created and are continuing to create. Number 2, follow the women's lead. The women are the experts. They are the experts on what they need to heal and sustain themselves. They have created a movement, a divine movement dedicated to restoring themselves and each sis around them. They're also building a model of care that can be replicated throughout the United States and across the globe. My friends, follow their lead. Follow their lead on how to develop care models, pastoral care models, community-based models, care models that serve Black women, that heal Black women from racialized trauma. Number 3, reimagine models of care. This goes hand in hand, really, with the recommendation before. It calls for a shift. It calls for a shift from our current models of care that are steeped in dominant white culture and practice. If you accept the conclusion that Black women know best how to care for themselves, and if you agree that the method of care they've chosen is anchored in womanist care and SisTheology, then you must embrace further research into care models that build on this work and enhance this movement. And then, provide financial resources. Nobody really likes to talk about that one. One of my interviews was with a Black woman who leads a South Minneapolis-based community development organization that often partners with the dominant white system to bring change to the neighborhood she serves. And she said, quote, "Black and brown bodies are constantly being asked to name what we need. And yet, we run up against the system that other people who don't know how to help to facilitate, we run up against the system and other people who don't know how to help facilitate a path to more well-being." Provide financial resources. Provide resources, spaces, opportunities. Help them facilitate through your talents and treasures. All of these things will enable Black women to further create a womanist care and SisTheology rooted initiative and various initiatives. And then celebrate. The point of Render Free and the movement it is part of is to prioritize the healing of Black women, and then to send sisters back out into the world, quote, more full and more liberated. Celebrate the flourishings of Black women and applaud the divine movement they've sparked for individual and collective healing. My friends, that's the brunt of that's my research in a nutshell. That is what I found, but there's so much more. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This movement is taking shape. This movement, I've noticed and I found, and as I alluded to, is the next part of the next level of research is to look at how this movement is bubbling up in other places. And ultimately, when I go to South Africa, which is where I'm going to go next to live, it will also be to connect the dots, to connect the movements that are taking place, not just all throughout the United States, but across the globe for the collective uplift and healing over the long haul for Black women. It was Audre Lorde who said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." Let it be so, my friends. Let it be so. Thank you. And so, on the screen were all of the things, slides that go along with what I was sharing. They will be available to you if you're interested on my website, gracemultimedia.org, and I invite you to go there. There's also a link to my full doctoral research. This was research tied with my efforts as part of my doctoral work through McCormick Theological Seminary, my Doctor of Ministry work, specifically in the area of pastoral care. And so there's a link there to the full research from that, as well as other information on my website about how to expand and grow in this area and in others. I'll open the floor up at this point for questions. We have a mic as well. Pastor has a mic there. And for a few minutes, I will do my best to answer questions, whatever has bubbled up for you in what I've said, or if there's something else on your heart and mind related to this that you'd like to share, I'll be happy to entertain that as well. Somebody's got to go first.
Okay, I think you said you came here in 2019, which was the year before the George Floyd thing. How did you pick Minneapolis, and why this place? Why? Because there's many places you could have chosen, I assume.
So I came here to pastor a congregation, initially to co-pastor a small congregation on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, and the other person I was co-pastoring with, we're going to do that for about a year, and then shortly after I got here, that person retired much earlier than planned, and so I ended up being the solo senior pastor in that space. After that work was finished, that season ended, the church and I agreed that that season we had done what we were asked to do, and that we needed to move in other directions. I felt as though my work here was not finished, and so I moved into the Twin Cities, where I could be a little more connected to my tribe, if you will, and that was right as the pandemic was hitting, and did some work in St. Paul with the homeless population there, and then ultimately landed in South Minneapolis as the executive director of faith-based nonprofit. Yeah. Other questions? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that you'll be going to South Africa.
Yes.
And I'm assuming you're planning to continue your research?
I am. I'm going, in addition to the work that I'm doing, I'm an endorsed and appointed global servant or missionary through the American Baptist Churches USA, and I'm being assigned to a seminary in Cape Town, South Africa, where I'll be for a 4-year term in country and then a year back at home. So I will be doing that work and this work. It all intersects, and continuing to look at the large, broad areas of peace and justice and reconciliation and healing and all of those huge issues and topics that, again, intersect with one another. Nothing is on an island unto itself. It all works together.
Yes.
Yes, it would be so interesting to see some of the findings that you have from the women and their experiences in South Africa. So I'm assuming you'll continue to put findings from your research on your website, because I would be very much interested in hearing the commonalities and then the unique experiences of the women in South Africa.
Thank you. Keep an eye out. As I'm able, I will continue to do the work.
And thanks for doing this work. I can identify on many levels. Yep.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Hello, and thank you for your research and for your talk.
You're welcome.
I'm interested in whether or to what extent womanist care specifically, and possibly SisTheology, transcends Christianity and includes or does not include women of various faith traditions.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found in doing this research and understanding what was happening with the women in this movement that was developing, that it was not necessarily tied to a specific faith tradition or faith practice. It was which is why I talk about it as a divine movement. That it is less about traditional notions of faith and formation and spirituality from a structural standpoint, and more about the divine, however you define the divine. And the women I encounter define that in a multiplicity of ways. Tapping into the divine and using the energy and gifts from the divine, and then bringing that together with the divine in each of the other sis, right, in our sisters, and using that as the force that begins to help heal and restore. And so it is a movement that is I don't like to say spiritual, not religious, but it is a movement that is divinely focused. And so I think womanist care and SisTheology very much are in alignment with that. They dovetail with that. Womanist care isn't necessarily about being Christian or this or that or the other. It's about it comes out of the Christian tradition, but it continues to evolve and broaden and stretch as a way of as a theology and as a way of being, right? And so I think the challenge for us is to follow the women as they are redefining that, as they're taking that divine way of thinking to the next level. Because we, particularly in the Christian tradition, we like to keep things sort of carefully in our space, and they're saying no. These are and the activities that they're using, the sacred activities that they're developing, are happening not necessarily in church spaces or in sacred spaces. They're sacred activities happening in secular spaces often. So there's no, it's less about where and the system. It's more about what we are doing in it, what we are doing with the divine, and how we are using that to heal and sustain. Did that answer your question? Okay. Okay. Other questions?
We loved hearing what you found the women doing to cultivate care in their own communities. And I'm always interested in when folks do this kind of really in-depth qualitative research in pastoral care, what most surprised you? What did you find that you didn't expect that you would find?
Yeah, I knew this, but it became more apparent to me as I was doing this work how hard this is, how exhausting this is. And so you ask women to show up and to answer questions and to sit and to and to give even more for the purposes of research. And they've already given. I mean, they're already to their limit, and on their last. And so what I think what surprised me was that I underestimated the level of exhaustion, the level of weariness, and I just sort of assumed, of course you'll want to talk about, of course you'll want to do this work. And yes, the women do want to do this work, but folks are tired. They're just tired. I mean, they're just, and you've got to, and so in these sacred spaces and activities, you can just be. Right? SisTheology came out of, that term came out of, I showed up at Render Free when it was a wellness and workspace, and the first time I showed up, Ariel, she greeted me hey sis, how you doing? I didn't know her. Hey, how you doing? And every time I would go back, hey sis, how you doing? And so there's a level of heaviness always, and armoring up, that's the term she used. And so I guess I just underestimated just how weary and tired and debilitating this thing is. I wasn't here very long, and there are people who've been here much longer than 3.5 years. So that was one of the biggest, I guess, learnings for me in this work. Yeah. Other questions? Other questions? Anything, it's okay. Yes?
As a future leader in the church who is white, how is it best appropriate for us to care for communities that have Black women in them who know their own needs and communities better than we might, especially from that perspective of pastoral care? Sure.
So I think my recommendation sort of touched on that a little bit. I think one of the main things is to sort of help shift the paradigm, right? Sort of help turn things over on their heads a little bit, as guided by the women themselves, right? Because we have sort of in the Christian church sort of very traditional ways of caring for people, and particularly within the church, the pastor, or the Stephen whatever grief group, or and we have these committees, and the women the people that send the cards, and all those sort of very traditional things, which are all good, but they are things that are things we decide that you need. And so what these women are saying is we get to decide. And we have decided. We have decided. And so I think what we need to be doing in churches and in institutions and in other places is saying, tell me how I can support what you've already decided you need for yourself. And then believe it. And support it. And advocate for it. And be quiet when it's needed. Or move out of the way. And all those things, right, that we do with the intent of helping to uplift, of uplifting. That's what we do in pastoral care, right? Yeah. Other question? Did I answer your question? Others?
Okay. I was raised a American Baptist, and so I should know better, but when I hear pastoral care, I think of a pastor caring, and that's not what I'm hearing you describe is the, what you're seeing happen.
Right.
So can you just link that, what's pastoral care about the phenomenon that you're seeing?
You mean, how does it intersect with pastoral, how does this?
Yeah, or do you describe it as pastoral care, or is it, are you focusing on a particular role for ordained?
So I think that this is this movement is a movement of care that does connect and link up with the core tenets of pastoral care. And there are others in here that are more, there are others, colleagues and experts in pastoral care that are in the room too. So, you're welcome to speak to this, to help a sister out, right? So there are, that definition that I talked about earlier of pastoral care, right? There are core components and elements of pastoral care that are present in this movement, right? But this is creating an expanded definition of what our traditional notions of pastoral care are, right? And so they're not saying we're doing pastoral care. But if you know what pastoral care is, and you understand the value that it has, then you can see that the work is about, it is pastoral care, and it is also work that can help inform and change what we know as the traditional models of pastoral care. And so when you think about pastoral care, it is exactly what we're talking about. The pastor sitting in his or her office, with office hours, or the chaplain, or the hospital chaplain, or the prison chaplain, or all of those things are certainly valid models of pastoral care. But they are not models of care that are necessarily helpful for everyone. And so what I have found is, what I found in this work is that, when you know better, you do better. And so now we know better, right? That there's a whole population of people for whom they are the victims of racialized trauma. That's the area that I'm looking at. And so care, what does care look like for them? And what care looks like is them saying, we don't need your care. We're figuring it out for ourselves. That's in a much more safe space for us, because the models that we have are not safe and often do more harm. And so we're using some of the best. We've created some of the best practices from our sisterhood, our divine sisterhood, and we're creating a new model that can, in fact, help change the larger system. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Let me also say this. I shared this at another talk that I did earlier, because someone said something about, well, black women have been getting together for years, and centuries. My grandmothers got together, and they had sewing circles, and they had this stuff. Absolutely, they did. Absolutely, black women have been coming together for centuries, supporting one another. What's different about this movement? There are many things that are different, but what's some of the key things that are different about what's happening now is that they are unapologetically prioritizing their care. Not after the family is fed, not after the work is done, not after the husband or the church or everybody else said, we need you, and then you're all used up, and then you come together. They're saying, no. My very life depends on me doing this work. And so I found people they've walked off from six-figure jobs that have sucked them dry in order to do this work, and everything in between, right? So it's not necessarily saying this has never happened before. Black women have been doing this before, but what is different is Black women are now saying, if I'm not good, nobody else around me is going to be good. And that's what's different. Yeah. Other questions or comments or thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you again.
We do have a comment on the live stream.
Okay.
From Paula Moyer. She says, the challenge is for white people to learn how to support Black women's leadership and to remember that we are students, learning what our role is in white superiority.
Yes. Yes. Say that one more time, please.
The whole sentence?
Yes.
Okay. The challenge is for white people to learn how to support Black women's leadership and to remember that we are students, learning what our role is in white superiority.
Yes. That is true. What I will say is that I don't want to discount what was said, but what I also want to say is what I have discovered is that the movement is rolling regardless of whether or not folks are supporting it or not. It'd be nice if other folks understood, but it is happening anyway. It's happening anyway. Permission does not need to be granted. But thank you for, what was the word you used, not ally, but being, for being faithful accomplices. I like that. Well, my friends, thank you very much for listening and for your presence here again tonight. And I look forward to continuing to do this work with you and keep showing up virtually, gracemultimedia.org, and blessings on your individual and collective journeys. Be well.